in supporting an operating system. And in this video, I want to walk through how you can monitor CPU performance within an operating system in a computer. So let's go ahead and get started. So most of you already know about Task Manager. So if you go down to your toolbar at the bottom and you right click and you go to Task Manager and we go to the Performance tab, we can see some basic details about the CPU. And you can see over here, you can see the number of sockets. So we know we have one CPU, and that one chip has 4 cores or 4 CPUs. And then it's also hyper-threaded, and so those are logical hyperthreads or logical executions of each core. So each core can have 2 hyperthreads, and so 2 times 4 is 8. So logically we have 8 CPUs. Physically we have 4 CPUs, and those 4 CPUs are on one chip or one socket. And this is outlined in our reading, so this is not anything new to you, but I would encourage you to go out to Task Manager so that you can see how many chips you have, how many cores you have, and then hyper-threaded how many logical processors you have. And then we can also see a histogram of our CPU utilization, and you can see my CPU utilization is fairly low. It's right around 10%. So what happens when we increase that? So I'm going to go out to a tool here that will stress my CPU, and so I'm going to go ahead and start that. And if I go back over and look at Task Manager, you can see my CPU activity is now up around, spiking around 100% or down. And so you can see the utilization here going up and down for that stress test. And you can see over here, you can see the histogram has changed. Now this is great, but it doesn't give you a lot of detail. It doesn't say a lot of detail on what parts of the CPU are getting stressed and what kind of values are important when you see this. And so let's look at a tool that you will use for that. And that tool is called Performance Monitor. So I'm going to go ahead and start Performance Monitor. Now Performance Monitor, as I mentioned, is going to be a tool that you can use, and it's a very valuable tool, especially when you get into probably more advanced computer science courses or even network engineering or software development, where you need to really see what's going on in your computer. And the reason it's so valuable is that it is a surgical instrument where you can measure hundreds of different counters. Counters could be your CPU, your disk, your network, your memory, and I'll show you all these different counters that you can use to diagnose problems with your computer. And so we're going to go over and we're going to click on Performance Monitor, and we're going to go ahead and hit the green arrow. And these are loading all of the different counters that are available. Here, I'm going to stop that stress test so that we can have it running a little bit smoother. There, I went and stopped it. So this should maybe run a little faster. And what I'm going to do now is it's loading my counters, and this might take a little bit. And you can see all of these different counters that I can use. I can look at counters anywhere from my .NET runtime environment to my database environments to web servers to virtualization to memory usages. There's just to physical disk. There's literally hundreds of different counters that you can use here. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at our processor or CPU counters. So if we go down here, and they're all in alphabetical order, so we can go down here to processors. And let's see here, we can find our processors. Processor. So here's our processor counters. And you can see within the processor counters, there's lots of different values that we can measure. And what we're going to do is we're going to only look at a few of those. We're going to look at, first we're going to look at processor time. And so what we're going to do here is, well, before we look at processor time, I want to take a little bit and talk about the processor time. So the processor time is simply the percentage of total elapsed time that the processor was busy executing. That's very similar to the histogram that you see in Task Manager. This counter provides a very general measure of how busy the processor is, and if the counter is consistently higher than 90%, then you need to look at other counters. And we're going to look at two other counters next. So the percent processor time is just like what we saw with Task Manager. And so you can see I have these instances here. And these instances, let's go ahead and add the counter. And we're going to add all the instances and we'll hit OK. And you can see my instances here match up to what I have in Task Manager. So now I had all these logical processors. Now over here in my perfmon, I can see all these logical processors. All these different colors are each of the logical processors and how busy those processors are. So when I go back over here and I start my stress test, and we go back and we look at our counters, you can see now our counters are jumping. The histogram is jumping up higher, sometimes around 100%. Notice the level of detail that you get in perfmon versus the level of detail you get in Task Manager. In Task Manager, you just see the sum total of all the processes. With perfmon, you can actually get at the logical hyperthreads for each of those cores. And you can also change it so that you can see a report. And sometimes I like looking at the report because it's easier to read versus the histogram. And this shows you if you scroll to the right, you can see all of our logical processors or hyperthreads and how busy those are. And so you can see sometimes that some of these are jumping up to 90%. Okay? And so that is the percent, and that's how it's different than Task Manager. So that's the first, we'll say the counter that we use. Let's go back to histogram. Oops, I don't want to go to histogram. I want to go to my line chart. And so that's our first sort of counter, which is the processor time. Next, we want to look, and let's go ahead and stop that one. Next, what we want to do is we want to look at another CPU counter, and this is the privilege time. So the privilege time measures the percentage of lapse time that the processor spent executing in kernel mode. And kernel mode is really just the mode that, how do I want to describe it? It's the amount of CPU that's used to manage the operating system. So kernel mode is, you can think of, to manage the operating system. And that would include everything with memory management, I/O operations, right? So it's different than user time. So privilege time is the amount of CPU used, again, for your operating system mode. So let's go look at that counter. So we'll go back over to our counters, and we're going to go down to processor again, and we'll expand it out. And then this time we will add, oops, where is our CPU time? Interrupt time, privilege. There it is, privilege time. And then we'll go ahead and add that, and then we'll hit OK. And we want to get rid of the processor time. We don't want to see the processor time anymore. I should have cleared this out before we ran the privilege time, but that's all right. We'll just unclick everyone. And then we'll go down here, and now we should have the privilege time. And you can see that privilege time is fairly low. It's usually less than 20. And again, we can go look at the report, and that's a little bit easier to read. And you can see the privilege time is at about 5. And that's what we wanted to see based upon what the privilege time is. So anything above a 25% really indicates something's going wrong with one of your I/O devices. It could be a driver, it could be a hardware issue, where something is really consuming a lot of your CPU time. And notice that we don't have, oops, that was Task Manager, we don't have that. We have a very low processor, our privilege time. And so you can use the privilege time to really help diagnose if you have a hardware issue or a device driver issue or a device issue with your computer. And notice that we don't have that. Again, if we go to Task Manager, we don't have a way of seeing the privilege time. We only see what we talked about up over here, which is the processor time. Okay. And so one last counter we're going to look at is the user time. So the user time is the percentage of time the processor spends executing in user mode. So this will be executing applications on your computer. So it could be executing, if you had a database server on your computer, it's executing the database server, or if you had a web server, or if you had a Word document, or an Excel document, or if you had a C# program running, or if you have a Java program, those would all be using user time. And you really want to keep this number, should be below about 65%. If it's above 65%, then that you might have a process that maybe is utilizing a lot more of the memory, and you have some options such as increasing or moving that application to a different server, or where it has more memory or more CPU, or some other different options. But basically anything above, I would say 65%, is where you're running into some processor bottlenecks. So let's go look at processor time. And we'll bring this up again. And we'll go over here and we'll go look at our line. And what we're going to do is we're just going to clear that counter. We'll clear all those counters, and then we'll go ahead and add our processor, and then we're going to add our user time. And then we'll do all instances, and we'll add that. We'll hit OK. And now you can see we have, again, just like on our privilege time, we have a chart, a line chart for all of our logical processes, right? And that's just like what we saw with Task Manager over here, except now what we're seeing is we're seeing it by the logical processors. Remember, in Task Manager, we only saw the sum of all the processes, or the total. Here we can see it by logical process, by each one of those. If you go down to Task Manager again, by each one of those logical processes here, those 8. And if we go over and we look at report, you can see that we can see it by, over here you can see it by each instance of those logical processes. And you can see that I have a fairly high value. It bounces around, and it could go higher than 60. If we go over here and we play around with this a little bit, and we increase the number of threads, we should see a dramatic, and we did a dramatic increase in the user time. Now remember, and we can see the same thing in our Task Manager, remember we are looking at user time, right? So the application that I'm using to stress my computer is a user application, and so we should see an increase in the percent user CPU time, and it wouldn't impact the percentage of privilege time that we saw before, right? So this is perfmon, and hopefully this shows you some details on how you can use perfmon to get a better understanding of not only what is occurring with your CPU, but realizing that you could use the same tool to later on diagnose problems that could be occurring with your memory or your hard drive. And this perfmon's a very valuable tool. And hopefully this lesson also showed you the difference between user privilege, or between user CPU usage and privileged CPU usage, and then the total percent of CPU usage that can occur within your computer or within your CPU on your computer. So if you have any questions about perfmon or Task Manager or some of the counters that we discussed in this video, please reach out to your professor.